Hey everyone, on today's episode of the SysAdmin Dojo podcast, we've got Luke Orellana on, who is a Dojo author and an expert on infrastructure code at Microsoft. So Luke's going to be talking to us about what infrastructure as code is, why you should use it, why you should learn it, lots more, coming up next on the SysAdmin Dojo podcast. Well, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the SysAdmin Dojo podcast, the podcast designed to help you become the kick-ass system administrator within your organization. As always, my name is Andy Serwich, your host, and with me, I've got a good friend of mine and a Dojo author, Luke Orellana. How's it going, my friend?
Hey, everybody.
Hey, good to have you, Luke. I really appreciate taking the time to come out and share your knowledge today. So for those that may not know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Luke Orellana. I'm a VMware vExpert and a Hashicorp Ambassador for 2022 now. I also work at Microsoft as a software engineer for infrastructure on the platform team. Been doing that for a little bit over a year now. So yeah, I specialize mostly in Terraform on Azure.
That's quite the trifecta there. So VMware vExpert, Hashicorp Ambassador, I think it's called, you said, right? Yep. And then work at Microsoft. So you've got a lot of different platforms you're working with there. I mean, of course, you mentioned Terraform. That's obviously a Hashicorp product, but utilizing that within the platform team at Microsoft, I think you mentioned then, right?
Yep. Lots of Terraform every day. Yeah,
so you're kind of living in that infrastructure as code world, right? And I mean, really, that's kind of, I think back to how we used to do system administration, right? Infrastructure work specifically, right? Like, hey, we need more storage, or we need more compute, like order the hardware, wait for it to show up, rack and stack it, get it connected, installed, configured. I mean, that still has to happen in certain places, right? Certain data centers. I mean, Azure needs compute, right? So that work is happening there in some way, shape, or form. But by and large, I think a vast part of the industry has now moved to this new infrastructure as code mechanism for deployment, right? And I mean, when's the last time you really touched hardware, Luke?
Oh, I was just thinking about that this morning. Yep. Yeah. So first, the majority of my career, I did a lot of hardware, provisioning servers. I did some automation in some data centers, racking, stacking servers, running cable in data centers. That's right. So now the game has just changed. It's like my title's changed. I'm a software engineer now. I just work in code all day. So yeah, now the industry is evolving, so you're using software development practices to manage infrastructure, and it's really interesting. It's really let me think. So it's kind of like still in the baby stages. Like a lot of things are awkward to work with, but that's what makes it exciting, because now everybody right now are the pioneers for the infrastructure development career path right now.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I mean, I think back to the hardware, and I mean, for those that don't know, Luke and I used to work together at a service provider years ago. So Luke and I have at times together had our, been armed, elbows deep in the guts of a server in the past. And I mean, I think back to how much we used to work on infrastructure and hardware. And you know what? I don't think I miss it. Do you miss working with the hardware? I don't.
Nope. That's actually listed on one of the benefits of infrastructure as code and doing infrastructure development. So now your time isn't spent clicking through, documentation, what is it? Remember a server, small business server? It was all wizards. You'd have to click through that. So yeah, a lot of research shows that engineers that are spending their time doing that are less happy. It's really monotonous. Nobody wants to do it. So now with infrastructure development, you're using innovation. You're using your mind to come up with, more beneficial things than just clicking through something to deploy a server. So,
right.
Yeah,
definitely. Well, we've talked about infrastructure as code. We mentioned it a couple of times here so far in the last 5 minutes here, but I guess what we should do for those that may not be familiar with it, can you kind of give us a definition of infrastructure as code?
Yeah, so infrastructure as code, the very early forms of infrastructure as code is most likely like the ad hoc scripting. That's kind of how I got started, writing PowerShell scripts to deploy things. Now it's kind of evolved into all these different products, and now you have Kubernetes, which has its own infrastructure as code system in place. So essentially, infrastructure as code is using software development techniques and practices to manage infrastructure. And with that, you're taking that infrastructure and you're defining it in some sort of code, whether it be like a Docker file, that's infrastructure as code as well, or a script.
Gotcha. Okay, so you're just basically embedding your deployment in code, basically, is essentially what you're doing.
Exactly. Yep.
So I always think back to DSC, a desired state configuration, right?
Yes.
That was a thing that came out, boy, it feels like years ago now. And I remember Jeff Hicks, I think we both know Jeff Hicks, great guy, good PowerShell guy. I remember watching a course with Jeff Hicks one time, and he did such a good job of kind of explaining DSC and what would have ultimately become infrastructure as code by explaining this declarative language that infrastructure as code uses, right? And Jeff always explained it from the standpoint of like, hey, I'm going to create this blueprint, right? My code, right? My blueprint of what the infrastructure should look like. And then I'm going to enter the make it so phase, right? That's, his Star Trek reference, which I'm a Trekkie, so I really enjoyed that. But it was just like, it's so true. It's like, okay, here's what I want. Go do it, infrastructure, or cloud platform, Azure, go do it, right? Make it look like this, right? And so, I mean, that's so powerful when you think about it. I mean, a lot of people will look at that and they'll be like, well, how's that any different than what I'm doing right now, right? And I mean, like you mentioned before, right now it's all very, not right now, but the old way of doing things is very manual, right? I'm going to go here, configure this, go over here, configure this, make sure the two things are talking. Whereas, if I have this blueprint, this config file, and I can tell Terraform or whatever infrastructure as code tool I'm using, Ansible, I know there's a whole bunch of them, just go do it. Like, now I'm freed up to go do other things, right? So it's super, it's really exciting to me. It's one of those things you mentioned it earlier. It's an exciting tool, and those that are working in that space are kind of the pioneers for what looks to be the new way of doing things for infrastructure engineers, right? So now I know we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but at a base level, why would I want to learn infrastructure as code? If I'm a system engineer, maybe I've been in the industry for a year, 2, 3, maybe 5 years, maybe I'm still a junior admin. What are the benefits for me to learn infrastructure as code?
So whenever I think about the question, I'm always like, my mind goes back to if you ever watched The Mandalorian, where they say, "This is the way."
This is the way. This is the way.
It always pops up in my head. This is the way. This is the way you should be doing it. But there's like so many benefits. With infrastructure as code, you get the ability to provide self-service infrastructure. So think about like your technical account manager who's over-promising a deadline for a client. We're going to get you onboarded, all your infrastructure stood up by X date.
That never happens. What are you talking about?
Right? Yep. Not speaking from experience.
Right.
But essentially, they go to the ops team. They say, I overpromised this date. We need you guys to, take one for the team and do it. The ops team has to drop what they're doing and, cater to the sales team, basically. With self-service infrastructure, you could eventually automate everything so that, your sales team can onboard a client. Now they adhere to their own deadlines, and the ops team can focus on innovation, stuff that actually, matters. So that's one of the huge benefits. The other is speed and reliability. Like I said, back in the day, it'd take you a few days to deploy these servers by hand, clicking through stuff. Now you can do it in 5 minutes, and you can do it in parallel. So like with the cloud, you just run your script. I want 100 servers. Bam, there they are.
here's
10
100
minutes go
servers.
by. Exactly. And reliability. You're not configuring them by hand, so everything's configured the exact same way. Another
Every
one,
time.
now that
Every
exactly,
time.
yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And now that we talk about software development practices with your infrastructure, you have the concept of versioning. So you can take all your infrastructure code, put it into version control. Now you have the ability to historically look at changes made to your infrastructure. A lot of systems don't have that capability in place. So now you can look at each single commit done to your infrastructure, and you can see, oh, what changed around this time? Okay, let's look at the commit history. And then that also serves as documentation as well, living, breathing documentation. A lot of these infrastructures code tools are very easily readable by humans. Terraform, it's really simple to read.
Right.
So now you have visibility of how things are configured versus, VMware, you'd log into vSphere and you have to click around on the different parts. And
yep.
so now you can control F your infrastructure.
See, that's really cool. Really cool. Especially from a versioning controls perspective, because I can't tell you how many times I've, if I go back to when I was back in the trenches, being in a situation where it's like, I'd really like to try X or A or B, try these different methods to try and solve whatever I was working on. But like there was no easy rollback button, right? There was no easy way back. So with versioning control, I could come up with a new deployment, right? Or a modified deployment, try it. If it blows up, I just roll back and redeploy with the previous known working version of the deployment, right?
Exactly. That's a good point. So I'll throw out some stats here. So in 2016, the State of the DevOps report, it's a academically done report done by researchers with PhDs. It's very good. They found that companies that are using DevOps practices, using infrastructure as code, are able to recover from a failure by 24 times more. So so we have these CTOs, CIOs that read these stats and they're like, we need DevOps. So a lot of the career jobs you'll see, people want infrastructure as code skills. So it's highly, highly lucrative right now.
That makes sense. And infrastructure as code is one of those things that I've noticed from a skilling perspective. It's not like it's tied to one specific platform. So it's not like, oh, hey, I'm an AWS guy, right? And any infrastructure as code skills I learn are going to be specific to AWS. That's not the case, right? So, I can take these skills I learn and pretty much leverage them on any platform, AWS, Azure, on-premises infrastructure. That's kind of the way it is, right?
Yep. Especially with, PowerShell core can run on, Linux and all those different platforms now. Terraform has the concept is called providers, where you can write a provider for essentially anything. Somebody wrote a provider for ordering Domino's pizza with Terraform as a joke, but it actually works. So you can write a provider for anything. You can automate almost anything now. It's much better than it was, back when you and me were working together in the field. Like it was like, oh.
So using Terraform, I can order a pizza is what you're saying. So if I wanted to, see, now I'm thinking like weekend plans here and weekend tools. So, I've got a Stream Deck that sits on my desk, right? It's I don't know if you're not familiar with it. For those listeners out there, Stream Deck is it's a little hardware device that allows you to change from scene to scene in a streaming app like OBS or something like that. Or I can control my key lights on my desk here using my Stream Deck. Basically, it's just a pad with a bunch of buttons on it. And the thing is, the buttons are configurable. So I'm like, hey, now I'm hearing of this thing about ordering a Domino's pizza through Terraform. I wonder if via the API, I could configure one of the buttons on my Stream Deck to call Terraform to order a Domino's pizza for me, and it just shows up on my doorstep by the press of a button. So that's a blog post. That's a blog post coming up here. I don't know how useful it is for people, but it's just kind of like that nerd factor in me, right? So Oh, anyway, see, that's what people tune into the show for, is the hard-hitting technology information, like how to order a Domino's pizza in an automated fashion from a button on your desk, right? That's what people tune in for. Anyway.
Yep.
All right, so back to infrastructure as code here. So we talked about what it is, why I would want to learn it. So what are some of the core tools that are in play when we start talking about infrastructure as code? I know we've talked about Terraform a number of times. I imagine knowing code, you have to write the code. So I would think something like VS Code would be immensely useful for this as well.
Yep. Yeah. There's tons of different IDEs. You can use Vim. It's whatever is your preference. But VS Code is like the most popular. Has all these extensions where you can now you can have it like write code for you with GitHub Copilot. So yeah, VS Code is pretty legit now.
So you use Copilot to even help with that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
See, I wasn't aware of that.
It uses AI to learn your patterns as you're writing code. And then, I have some friends who write Golang, and it'll guess entire functions for them. It's really slick. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Pretty soon the humans aren't going to be writing the code anymore.
No. That's funny. But yeah, as far as tools, there's several different categories that the majority of people have broken stuff down into. One is like ad hoc scripting. That's one form. Then you have your configuration management. So you have like your Puppet, your Chef, your Ansible. Configuration management is generally enforcing a configuration on a server. So like Windows or Linux, you want to make sure that there's no drift. So if you have your server configured a certain way, if somebody comes in and changes it, it will revert back. So that's configuration management. Then you have your provisioning tools like Terraform, CloudFormation for AWS, ARM templates, and then you have Bicep as well. No. The other concept is server templating, and this is kind of newer. Tools like Packer or Docker even, they're basically just templating servers. And then there's this concept of immutable server. So instead of using configuration management where you're applying change over change to a fleet of servers, instead you're treating your servers like basically like a Docker container. You deploy it from a golden image each time you make a change. So you make the change to the golden image and then redeploy the server whenever you want to promote a new change. And that provides better rollback and stability versus configuration management. So that's a new pattern that's kind of emerging right now.
So you're getting back to the whole, there's always been this concept, right? Treat your servers like cattle, right?
Exactly. Yes. Oh yeah. And that's huge. A lot of people hear that, but when you're like architecting some solution out, sometimes you forget about it. You'll basically just put one server there, and then you start to like favor that. Oh, if that goes down, things are going to be out, and but if you architect your solution in a way where you're treating your server more like cattle, you don't care if it's down, then it makes for more resilient infrastructure. Yeah,
right.
That's a huge one.
Yeah, I have to quote one of our good friends, Didier Van Hoy, on this one. He always what does he say? He always says that, yeah, it's great to treat your servers like cattle, and you should, right? But like you said, there's always that one server. There's that one holy cow, as Didier says. Mm-hmm. There's always that holy cow that you just struggle to get rid of for some reason. I think the thing that I've always run into when it comes to that last stubborn workload is usually has something to do with some form of persistent data, right? Some data, yep. And there's new emerging ways to get around that, which I'm sure we could get into a whole other podcast episode specifically about that. But I know in my experience, that's been the one sticking point is anytime you have persistent data that can't survive a reboot, or you don't have to manage the connection to that persistent data, either from a container or your server or whatever you're deploying in an automated fashion, that's usually the sticking point that I've run into at least. So but like I said,
yep, 100%.
We'll have to come back to that one on a separate episode, just because there's there's a lot to unpack there. So, all right. So we talked about some of the standard tools in play. In terms of platforms, I mean, it sounds like infrastructure as code really works on any platform, right? So we talked about AWS. You mentioned Bicep and ARM. So Azure, obviously, we can do this with Azure. You mentioned that you're using Terraform on your team. So I have to believe you guys are using Terraform on resources in Azure, correct?
Correct. Yep. Azure's really huge with Terraform. It's a major bloodline of Microsoft. They have a team that's managing the Azure providers for Terraform. Terraform is huge for Microsoft.
Yeah. So, and then I think about the other things that you can tie into. So, again, I'm going to pick on Terraform for a second here. You've got the concept of providers in the Terraform space. And like you said, you can pretty much write a provider for whatever, right? So if let's say I have a Cisco switch, or no, better yet, I have a bunch of Ubiquiti gear in my lab here in the house. So I imagine there has to be a Ubiquiti provider out there, or I could go write one if I wanted to, right? Assuming Ubiquiti has an API I can tie into.
Exactly. Yep. You have to have some sort of API that you can interface with, and then you'd write your provider in Golang that would, talk to the API of the standard CRUD operations, and then, you could just automate it all. Interesting.
Yeah. So that just opens up so many possibilities, because I mean, a lot of time when people think about automated deployments, they think about the virtual machines, they think about the storage. They don't think about all the other bits and pieces of your infrastructure. So like my firewall or my switches or I don't know, my badge access software or anything that has an API basically, right? So I could kind of automate, which is really, really interesting and powerful, I think. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I see a lot of blog posts and videos in the near future here on some cool stuff that we could do there. In terms of resources to get started, what's the best way for people to get started in this area? I mean, I think a prerequisite would be you need to be fairly comfortable with scripting to begin with, right?
Yeah, there's a few tools out there to help kind of, alleviate the pain of learning how to script. Exorcism is a really good platform. It's open source, it's free, and you can learn PowerShell, you can learn Golang. You can pick up a language, and it's just exercises, and they're basically labs. So you start from easy, go to hard, and the way that I treat it is kind of like training for an athletic training. Basically, get your time in on the court.
Right.
Do 30 minutes a day. Do an exercise. Just at least touch it. Doesn't matter if you finish that exercise, but the more you touch it, the more you use it, the more it will stick, and then you're just building on your skills from there. What do they say? 1% better every day, and then after 90 days, you're 90% better. It's the same concept.
That's cool.
Just keep doing it, just in little chunks, and be consistent.
The other one I like along those lines is, put one brick down a day, and eventually you'll have a wall, right?
Exactly. Yep. Same concept.
Yeah.
Yep. So. Yeah, I would say, check out Exosystem. If programming is completely new to you, you might want to check out like a Udemy course. I've used Udemy courses in the past. The other thing I would say to really get into infrastructure development, check out some communities out there. A really good one that I like is the Cloud Posse community. There's a lot of intelligent people in there that are just they love Terraform, they love infrastructure as code, and even if it's predominantly AWS tech stack. And, I don't work in AWS, obviously, but I still go in and listen. I get all kinds of different concepts and new ideas from them. It's worth it. And they have their own Slack channel. You can talk, ask questions. Having a community for support is really huge. That's kind of what I'm finding, in my 10-year career is the times where I've had community to talk to and, learn from. That's the most growth I've had versus before when, it was just me at my desk.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, with something as complex as infrastructure as code and scripting in general, having like you said, a community to bounce those ideas off of, bounce those questions off of. I mean, heck, even come up with some ideas or maybe a different way of looking at a problem that you hadn't thought of. I've run into that personally in the past myself, where I'll put together this big, long PowerShell script that does, whatever, and I'm struggling with one particular section of the script, right? And I come to talk to somebody like you or somebody else, and they're like, well, hey, why don't you try it this way instead? Like, sometimes you need that different perspective, right? Because you get tunnel vision on solving the problem the way you've started solving the problem, and maybe that's not the best way, right? So that's...
Exactly.
It's nice having that community to help out in those situations. I think you also have a couple of infrastructure as code related articles out on the Altero Dojo, if I remember correctly. I want to say there was one on, I think they're all VMware related, if I remember correctly.
Yep. That's back when I was doing a lot of VMware infrastructure development. So lots of PowerShell, lots of, I got a few Terraform articles out there, but
yeah, I seem to remember those. So I'll be sure to link basically all the resources that you mentioned. I'll be sure to link in the show notes below or above or somewhere near this video. I'm not sure, depending on the platform you're consuming this content on. You guys will see that in the show notes. I'll be sure to get the link to the blog post I just mentioned as well. I want to say we did a webinar, it's probably been a few years now, Luke, but I think we did a webinar on infrastructure as code as well too. I need to go look at that one and see if it's dated. I think we stayed mostly in the 101, 201 type of area, so I think it's a lot of foundational knowledge in there, so I think it's probably still relevant, but I'm gonna go double check that before I link the notes. So be on the lookout in the show notes for that too. If it's there, it's worth watching. So
Yep.
Well, Luke, is there anything else you want to share with listeners, anything we missed in today's discussion? I know we kept it very 10,000 foot view, but we talked about what infrastructure as code is, why you'd want to learn it, some tools to get started, some resources to get started. I don't know, maybe example use cases. Is there something that really cool you've done with infrastructure as code that you might want to share? I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot with this one, but
I would say, so what I've been looking at now recently, I'm usually trying to keep up to date on the latest trends with the infrastructure development, but what I've been hearing is the kind of the next step for infrastructure development is using programming language, kind of like Pulumi does. Pulumi is doing the exact same thing. Using a programming language to do some of the procedural logic, like, how, when you write a script, it's, up top to bottom, procedural. So they're using that to feed into Terraform or some sort of declarative infrastructure as code language. So then you get the benefit of both declarative and procedural languages, and that's allowing people to build these like even greater abstractions. So let's say I want my infrastructure as code to pick a available subnet and then just use that. I don't want my sales guys to have to like calculate subnets out. So then you can basically program that out and then feed it into Terraform with your subnet, and it works really, really well. So that's kind of the pattern that I'm seeing emerging, and I'm sure it will get more popular throughout the years. But yeah, that's just one thing.
Sounds exciting. This is an area that just constantly changes, and I think that's what's so alluring to it. That's the alluring thing about it to people like yourself and me and the people that pay attention to it. So definitely. One last thing I want to wrap up with, Luke, is how can people get a hold of you if they have follow-up questions? I know you're out on Twitter, right? I think I'm
on Twitter and LinkedIn.
Luke Orellana.
Yep.
Okay.
Just my name. Just search for me. I'm on there.
Gotcha. I'll get that in the show notes as well. Other than that, I want to say thanks for showing up and taking the time to talk to us today. It's been good having you. We'll have to have you on for a future episode of the podcast. Yeah, I'm surprised. I think this is the first time we've had you on, isn't it? I don't think we've...
First time.
I'm surprised it's taken us... Boy, by the time this airs, it'll be 13, 14 episodes. I'm surprised it's taken that long to get you on the show, but we'll have to have you back again sometime in the future. And so again, thanks, Luke, for coming out. Those of you watching, listening, thanks for tuning into the show this week. We hope to see you again for another episode of the SysAdmin Dojo podcast 2 weeks from now. Be on the lookout for that. Other than that, be sure to check out the Altero Dojo at www.altero.com/dojo. We've got all kinds of different content there. We've got sections for Hyper-V, M365, VMware, MSP, backup and DR. Just go to that URL again, altero.com/dojo. Pick your poison. Lots of great content out there. Other than that, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time. Have a good one. Hey everyone, it's Andy again. Hey, thanks for watching the episode today. Hope you enjoyed it. One thing I wanted to leave you with, we've been talking a lot about Azure Stack HCI, Hyper-V, hybrid cloud, and a lot of the recent episodes. Wanted to let you know that on March 23rd, we are running a webinar that talks about all things Azure Stack HCI and hybrid cloud. Now, you can register for that webinar by clicking on the link in the description of this episode. And if you're watching or listening to this episode after March 23rd, you can use that same link to watch the webinar on demand. So hope you enjoy it. Again, we hope to see you for a future episode of the podcast. Have a great day.